Hello, my name is Edwin Kumasaru. I'm a research fellow at the Paul Mellon Centre, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all this evening. I'm also a co-convener of the Courtaulds Gender and Sexuality Research Group, alongside Dr. Rachel Warriner, who is a British Academy postdoctoral fellow here at the Courtauld. This is our second public event. The first one was a workshop earlier in the year about menstrual politics. It's really exciting to welcome you all, and especially our speaker tonight, Tai Shani. You can use the hashtag #OccultImagination to tweet about the discussion. And you can also tag us at Courtauld GS or the Courtauld Research Forum at Courtauld Res. It would be really lovely to hear your comments, questions, thoughts as the event unfolds. As I say, it's a real honour to welcome Tai Shani here this evening. She'll speak for about 45 minutes and then we'll have a question and answer session. I'll introduce her properly in a moment, but first I want to say a brief note about the theme for tonight's event. The lecture and discussion will consider Tai's work, alongside the relationship between feminism and the occult. Magic has become an important image for fourth wave feminism, feminist art and activism, but it also has a long history being used as a tool for political resistance. Tai's performance installation, DC, and I might pronounce this wrong, Samiramis, I'm sure Tai will correct me, responded to writer Christine de Pizan's 1405 proto-feminist text, The Book of the City of Ladies, an allegorical city for notable medieval women. The DC of the title refers to Dark Continent, an allusion to psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud's description of adult female sexuality. Tai's project examines both the violent structures that have long shaped ideas of womanhood and the forms of radical resistance to such histories of containment, including the very gender binary itself. At times hallucinatory and otherworldly, the project makes the case for the powerful potential of a feminist imagination to rethink our world. Tai's work throws up profound questions about time and how it's conceptualized, and the ways in which deeper narratives shape our very understanding of history itself. Whether we see the past as a series of linear progressions, or something in which traumatic violence recurs and reverberates across centuries. Sadly, my colleague, Rachel Warriner, can't join me as a host tonight because she's currently on maternity leave. But her research considers the way 1970s feminist art in the US explored images of the supernatural. My own research on Brexit and British art has considered the ways the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis led to a resurgent interest in the occult, from feminists and anti-racists, artists and activists to the far right. This historical moment also featured critical re-evaluations about the Enlightenment itself, for its role not just in the very mechanisms of European colonialism and patriarchy, but also rhetorically in the way some claimed their self-anointed modernity and progress supposedly gave them the right to oppress others. Recent books like neuroscientist Gina Rippon's The Gendered Brain and Angela Saini's Superior, The Rise of Race Science, have challenged the ways in which science has long claimed to be objective or neutral, when actually such knowledge has always been shaped by questions of power, politics, and prejudice. We may have inherited a worldview that understood magic and science as opposites, one supposedly rational and the other irrational. But such a conceptual binary only ever served to justify a status quo. As Ty's work demonstrates, we can rethink some of these narratives to reimagine both our pasts and potential futures. So before we begin, just a quick note on how the Q&A will work. You can either post your questions on Twitter using the hashtag #OccultImagination hashtag, or wait until the papers are finished and then use the raise your hand function and you'll be unmuted. And then you'll get to speak. You're also welcome to post any questions in the chat along through the talk, and then if I see them, I can always ask them to Ty at the end. If you do that, make it very clear it's a question in the beginning, and if you just write like capital letter question colon, then when I'm scanning comments, that's really helpful. So without further ado, I'll introduce Ty herself. Ty Shani is one of the 4 artists awarded the 2019 Turner Prize. The nominees requested for the prize to be shared as a symbol of solidarity at a time of global political crisis. Some of her recent exhibitions include Turner Contemporary in Margate, Centro Centro in Madrid, the Tetley in Leeds, Nottingham Contemporary, Tramway in Glasgow, the Athens Biennial, Wiseling Arts Centre in Cambridge, the Serpentine Galleries, and Tate Britain. She is a tutor in contemporary art practice at the Royal College of Art. So if you can all join me in welcoming her.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, so I decided, usually I kind of focus on something quite specific in a talk, but everything feels so kind of overwhelming at the moment that I decided to just kind of talk you through my practice in a slightly different way than I do. I've got a bit of a weird setup, so I'll be sharing my screen, but I'll be looking down because I've got an iPad here with my notes, and I'm going to probably read a lot of the notes just because my brain is more scattered than normal at the moment. And they're little, I've tried to think up little things that I could do that could make us feel more together in our isolated lives. So there might be just like little bits, like I'm going to begin with a minute and a half of a GIF with some music, and then I'll start talking through the work. I think I should probably give some content warnings. There's a lot of descriptions of violence, sexualized and physical. There's quite a lot of graphic content in it. And yeah, so just it's a warning. Okay. Okay, so this isn't going to be a conventional talk, but in this moment of decomposition, it feels right for it to not be anything else but this. So DC Productions, I'm going to talk you through this project with flashbacks to other projects and then move forward. DC Productions was an ongoing feminist project, iterated through character-led installations, films, performances, and texts, which began in 2014 in a show called Mirror City at the Hayward Gallery. I felt like something so fundamental had happened to my worldview that had dissolved the nihilism that in a way made the world bearable, but also meaningless. Like this glass that I had felt between me and the world had been shattered, and I felt part of an existential project that I wanted to find a way to contribute to with my work. In April 2018, I presented DC Semiramis, the culmination of this 4-year project, a 12-part performance which took place within a large-scale installation. This led to my Turner Prize nomination. I was in Turin at the time, an esoteric and mysterious city, when I received the phone call and I screamed in the street. I caught my reflection in the window of the city's oldest cafe. Inside it was all paneled in beautiful wood. And that fleeting double exposed image of the present and the past illustrates my thoughts of the good fortune that I have known. My work is the greatest love of my life. It is a bridge between worlds. It is a spaceship and an interface through which I understand, through which life is made endurable. It calls to the questions I can't even iterate. And within the work, it also contains so many questions I'm unable to answer. Why this and not something else? I will try and answer some of these today. So these are some images of the performances in various venues. It toured around a little bit. I had different partnerships to kind of make this happen. It was very difficult to raise the money to make it happen and to kind of also convince people to put it on. So I had the Tetley in Leeds, Glasgow International, and Nottingham Contemporary. And am I forgetting someone? Perhaps. I'll get back to that if I do. So here it's in Glasgow. We restaged it in a much smaller capacity at Nottingham Contemporary and also kind of tried to rethink. It was quite nice being able to go back and rethink some of the I guess things that had worked or had worked less. It was a very big push to make it all happen in Glasgow over 4 days. So it was quite nice to have the opportunity to kind of process it and come back to it a little bit. And of course, I did the final performances at Turner Contemporary. I think we did 2 a day over 3 days. So we chose 6 for this presentation in a very different kind of context as well. So the whole project was an experimental and expanded adaptation of Christine de Pizan's 1405 proto-feminist book, The Book of the City of Ladies, within which Christine, the writer, builds a city of women with the help of Lady Justice, Reason, and Rectitude. This allegorical city aims to counter the suspicious and misogynist views of her time and advocates for the importance of women's social participation. The city she builds is not only for women, but it is made of women. They are the building blocks of the city. What was more of interest to me is that Pizan is not only interested in seizing control of the way women are represented in literature, a task historically undertaken and ideologically motivated by men, but also she calls on to all women to contribute towards a feminist hereafter. The other point of return for me is that in the book, distinctions between myth and history are blurred. That is something I extended into my adaptation in the construction of the characters and follows me throughout my practice. My very, very, very loose adaptation created an ahistorical, non-linear, non-place, simultaneously internal and geographic past and future, a city in time, but not in space. So I have used adaptation in my work a lot. It's a vessel. It's a very useful starting point for research for me. And they also carry this kind of associative worlds in the cultural drag that they have behind them. I'm particularly interested in adaptations that have historically been political, ideological, or philosophical agents. But also my mind is incredibly chaotic, and I'm also very unsure of my thoughts. They are often a storm I cannot understand, and adaptations have given me structure and have also pushed me into thinking differently or constructively. So this is an image from Michael Powell's film, Peeping Tom, within which the killer, I won't spoiler it too much, but the killer creates this kind of camera that the tripod is a dagger at the end, and the actual lens goes through this concave mirror and films his victims as he's killing them, and they are forced to look into their own eyes. And there was something very Medusa-like about this for me. So it kind of also brings in how a lot of mythological archetypes do get reinvented all the time culturally, and that's something that's really interesting to me as well. So this was my adaptation that looked at Peeping Tom and the Medusa. It was called The Idol Eye, Stone Idol Eye. And it was a series of monologues and like a light show, I guess, between tableaus. So this person's called Frankie Clooney, and I once met her at Camden Art Centre. She was looking at a photograph, I think, and she pulled a pin out of her hair, and I could just I heard it drop, and it made me turn around. And I saw this incredibly long hair that kind of felt very, very fairy tale-like and mythological to me. So I approached her and asked her if she'd ever be interested in being in a performance. And she actually was a life model. So a few years later, I was asked by the Royal Academy to do a performance for their students. And they have this anatomical horse in the drawing room there. So I decided to kind of create Lady Godiva. And I wrote this piece for her. I wrote this piece because I knew that I wanted to have her I wanted her to participate in one of the performances. And there was something so kind of potent, effectively, about her hair, and it just made sense to me. So sometimes also I make work because of just chance of, something coming up. I did, this is an adaptation of Antigone. So I kind of had 4 different Antigones from different adaptations, from the Sophocles, Cocteau's, Kierkegaard's, and Volker Schlondorf's adaptation, which had a Baader-Meinhof narrative embedded within it, and a kind of oracular Antigone, which was my contribution. I staged an adaptation, a theatrical adaptation of Fassbinder's World on a Wire. It's a filmmaker that I'm very inspired by. The tone and the mise en scène is something that I think comes up a lot in my own work. And here is an image from the performance. So there was like an RGB time machine, and we transported the hero from one cinema to the other. It was at the Rio Cinema, where I used to be an usher. I did an adaptation of Dali's Dream of Venus Pavilion, which was, again, it wasn't something that I had found myself, but Rosie Cooper, who was working at the Barbican at the time, she commissioned me to do a performance in response to it for the Surreal House show that was there at one of my favorite exhibitions, I think, of all time, actually. And again, this was a really interesting kind of starting point for me to think about, like what happens when you use another person's artwork as well in your own. This is another image from the Dali Dream of Venus Pavilion. And it's interesting because to me, it's definitely his most interesting work, but one that he wrote out of the canon because of he just didn't get along well with the person who was funding it at all. And they ended up having such horrific clashes that he's kind of written it out of his canon, but I think it's his best piece. It had walls that were made out of glass with water inside, and the performers would swim inside these enormous kind of fish tanks, I guess. But it also had a soundtrack to it, and it was a very prescient performance space, really. Even some of the kind of politics of it are obviously very questionable. But yeah, I really enjoyed restaging it, and this was the restaging that I did. And the Queen's Museum have the archive of this piece because it's within Flushing Park, which is kind of under their cultural jurisdiction. So they allowed me to use a lot of original archival materials, which was really wonderful as well. At the time, I was interested in the idea of what happens to fiction when it isn't observed, the fictive space that is completely in the imaginary, but also triggered by objects or language or even moving image that is tied to materiality, books, DVDs, what happens to them when they're not observed. So many of my narratives revolved around the many lives of actresses. It hadn't yet dawned onto me that I was compelled by the performance of femininity within that archetype. I've always been interested in the relationship of the objects, the material, objective reality of fiction, books, DVDs, photographs, mushrooms, LSD blotters, and the immaterial subjective experience that happens through them. These are like anchors and portals. Walt Disney's Fantasia. So I'm just going through things that I like really right now. So Walt Disney's Fantasia is, there was something about the intensity of affect that left a kind of watermark in me. And I think about that often, this kind of absolute suspension that some works can induce in you. I really want to be able to do that. I want to be able to make work that you want to come back to, or that you miss, and that something is left in excess, unconsumed, that you want to revisit. I watched this as a child, and when I think I understood that it was made and not produced by nature. And I think this was the first thing I'd seen that made me want to be an artist. I think I wanted to make as well. I didn't really know what that meant yet. I also saw this on acid once as a teenager, and that also left quite a strong impression on me. Okay, so here's a selection of some feminist science fiction books that were quite pivotal to my thinking over the years. Okay, I can't move that. I grew up in a hippie commune in Goa at the twilight of the countercultural era, when all the incredible politics and explorations had been dissolved by disappointment into some kind of nihilistic hedonism and a cocaine-fueled transformation into a libertarian neoliberal betrayal. Science fiction was some of the first fiction I was given to read when I learnt to read when I was 10 and finally entered the educational system. Authors such as Pamela Sargent in The Shore of Women, Sally Miller Gerhardt in The Wonderground, and Susie McKee Charnas in The Motherlines has served as a significant narrative device to articulate feminism's ultimate goals, egalitarian civilizations and realities beyond gender. Writing is also very much at the core of my work, although I really, truly, deeply hate it. And it brings me to the edge of my sanity. But something happens in the writing that does not happen in the other facets of my practice. The writing is often a struggle of translation, of a perilous journey that brings discrete affects into the shared space of the word. The object and image making is again a process of interpreting this into materials and compositions. Throughout this presentation, I will read you an excerpt of the 3 projects I'm talking about today. The scholar Amy Hollywood has a paper called The Unspeakability of Trauma, The Unspeakability of Joy. And I think fundamentally, this is the problem that guides me from dread to language in my writing. Ineffability, unspeakability are deeply, deeply mystical to me. So original text by Teresa of Avila and other female mystics like Hildegard von Bingen, Marguerite Porete, Julian of Norwich are also experiments in trying to bring into language the unspeakability of their love of the divine, or their mystical eros, which is divine. This might be the most pretentious thing I say today, but I am in Lacanian analysis, so I'm going to do it. In other words, the unspeakability of eros, the unspeakability of thanatos. When I first was introduced to these mystical texts, I was immediately struck at how much they are incredible examples of what Hélène Cixous terms as écriture féminine, a form of writing that foregrounds the political importance of language for the psychic understanding of the self and gender. So this is just a little, I don't really believe anymore in like kind of quoting necessarily. I'll probably do it throughout the talk, but I don't really feel that there is a need to kind of foreground one's practice or to validate it through references. But I thought maybe it could be useful to just do a very kind of quick list of things that, or writing that had influenced me during the writing of this project. So Luce Irigaray on excess, Donna Haraway on hybridity and kinship, Bataille on transgression and limit experience, Audre Lorde on fictionalizing the deeply personal, the autobiographical, and how to use that to speak of a political category, Catherine Malibu on plasticity and gender, Judith Butler on gender and embodiment, Toni Morrison on whiteness and the fictional imagination, Ursula K. Le Guin on world building, Maurice Blanchot on limit experience, the image and myth, Octavia Butler on the politicization of the speculative, Elaine Scarry on pain and torture, and Silvia Federici on the institutionalization of rape and prostitution, as well as her writing on witches. Yeah, I know that she's now a little bit problematic, but yes, these were texts that were very important to me. So these are the kind of, I'm going to show you now like some of my more visual references. Throughout the DC Semiramis project, there's very many references within it that are quite maybe discrete, that refer to like forgotten or overlooked histories that, you know, could be a reclaimed history of feminism. So this beautiful miniature model of the Temple of the Sun was made by a woman who was a servant. Her name was Elizabeth Radcliffe. She made it in 1773. And it's a kind of fantastical, glittery dreamscape of the ruins of Palmyra. And the queen of Palmyra was Queen Zenobia, who also appears in de Pizan's book. So there's lots of these kind of overlappings between de Pizan's book and references which aren't necessarily to do with character, but might be, I don't know if you remember, but the first slide I showed you of my work was a pink installation, and it was based on this. So this is some postmodern architecture from the 1980 Venice Architectural Biennial, and these are all facades. The idea was that all these architects were given a facade to build, and it was called La Strada Novissima, and it was just a walkway of incredible, weird looking entries. So I think there's something about the stylistic collapse in postmodern architecture that is very appealing to me. When I was little, I had a reoccurring dream of trying to navigate a city that was in perpetual movement. Streets would come in and move across. And there's something about the postmodern collapse that reminds me of that dream, or the idea of a game shutting down and glitching with incongruous bits of information colliding, or an imaginary possibility of what happens when you die and all your memories or maybe time itself collapses. This logic has been at the core of my aesthetic approach, I think. This is Super Studio's continuous monument, again, an imaginary monument that spans impossible spaces. So a monument in time, but not space, which is again something that I thought a lot about in the construction of the City of Women, or DC Semiramis, was how I could only ever make these tiny visual fleeting manifestations of it, and I wanted it to somehow expand beyond what the materiality of it was. This is Site Architecture Studios. They were commissioned to do all these best supermarkets in, I think, the late 70s, early 80s in America. And they're really kind of theatrical spectacles in the everyday, which appeals to me. And Charles Moore's Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, again, there's something about this kind of excess of different vernaculars that has been very important to how I've made work. Okay, so back to my own work. This is an image of Andromedan Sad Girl, which was at Wising Art Center, and it's a collaboration between Florence Peake and myself, and it's an archaeological site of sacred relics so far in the past or in the future that those temporal distinctions are blurred. What is a temple? What is the occult agnostically were some of the questions we were thinking about. Some more images. So I'm going to just say the things that I was thinking about when I started making this project: a space to imagine an alternative history, which privileges sensation, experience, and interiority, undermining patriarchal conceptions of narrative history, and constructs a possible post-patriarchal future. What would an avant-garde epic be today? I was looking at traditional epic tropes such as apocalyptic potentials, the interiority of panoptic heroines, deep time. The political landscape has shifted dramatically, and it leaves me with more questions about not only this work, but about the role in art in times like these, and how the profoundly problematic structures that support, disseminate, and create the conditions of consumption leave our roles as artists as very vulnerable. So I'm going to quickly whiz you through. I realize I'm not doing well on time. I'm sorry. I'm going to whiz you through the episodes, that the 12 characters, and then move on quite quickly. So there were 12 characters. Each one had their own episodes. Sometimes that would result in an installation or a film or a performance. So they had different ways of being in the world. Okay. So this is Cube of Flesh. It's an adaptation of Bluebeard, where all the 7 wives are conflated. It was the first bit of writing I did. It was commissioned by a death metal fanzine called Buried. I was looking at the time at some death metal bands and like the kind of catalogue of misogynistic atrocities that they were imagining. And I kind of wanted to outdo them in a way and trespass into their territory. So I don't think that anything is forbidden. I think women are not responsible for goodness. I don't think that we should think about good and bad in a binary gendered way, for sure. And I wanted to write about violence from a feminist embodied perspective. I didn't feel like I needed permission, and I think we should be able to choose to do these things responsibly and ethically, but I didn't feel that me writing about violence was wrong, although a lot of people did. So this is the Neanderthal hermaphrodite, and she's, or they, are self-reproducing. It was an attempt to think of a subjectivity that is before language. Mystical best friend, again, the medieval mystic built into the city walls. So yeah, I kind of, again, was looking at both some of the theory written around mystical writing, but also the ideas in it and their attempts to kind of express this love they have and the psychedelic nature of their writing, an experience unbound yet held within the confines of the irrationality of religion. Their texts are corporal, excessive and erotic, and realize the sphere of the other. And this here is a portrait of a mystic. So quickly, this is Let's Eat Grandma, that they did the soundtrack for the project. And at the beginning, I played you a little bit of music, which was Maxwell Sterling, who is an ongoing collaborator. And I feel like we've really kind of developed an understanding of each other's languages. Woman on the, yeah, sorry, I'm running out of time. I'm going to go through these quite quickly. Woman on the Edge of Time, named after Marge Piercy's books. All the characters are introduced by like a bit of writing that contextualizes the research that I was doing. This is the vampire. They live at the bottom of the sea on the threshold of life and death. And the narrative is told through flashbacks that happen when a psychic anemone, which is fused to her clitoris, moves and she orgasms. This is Nemesoid, a soft piece of software that constructs human experiences. Again, a close-up from one of the performances. This is in another space. This is Phantasmagorgasm. This was based on Gothic conventions, a tale of two cursed sisters that perpetually bury the decomposing corpse of their father. Quite heavy symbology there. And as long as they scream, he remains buried. But when they grow tired, he reemerges. So it's this kind of ongoing need to shout him out with words out of existence. This is it staged somewhere else. And this also was a VR piece based on that text that was commissioned by Karen DeFranco and Irene Ravel. And this is another character called the side chick Anemone, but it's psychic anemone, which appears in all the narratives in different ways. And they are also AI. Maybe there are no organic humans in my city. Maybe none of us are organic at all. I don't know. Here it is at the Athens Biennial, and here somewhere else. Okay. So I'm going to read a little piece now, a little excerpt from Paradise, and I'm reiterating content warning now about gore, violence, physical violence. Okay. I would not know how to be sincere enough to independently communicate the details right now. I would not know how to invest wisely in language right now. I would not know how to backpedal from syntactic ambiguity right now. Organic research, oh wow. On the white mulberry leaf, the silkworm secretes a sticky protein from its salivary glands, which hardens when it comes into contact with the outside world. It twists the filaments into a double helix. It spins a cocoon, creating an armor of secretions to protect its vulnerability during brutal transformative processes that recalibrate violated subjectivities. It emerges as pure transmission, as velvety biomimetic nodes, a tipped wine glass caked in sour burgundy powder and swirled sediment, a geology, an excavation into deep time that will not go away, the stain that will not be washed clean. There is one thing I know for sure. I need to tell it to you. I will never be able to safely love my dear dead daddy. Below the undulant ebb of the last expendable supple rib, there is a gash of torn capillaries and feathered nerves. Connective tissue is disconnected at the ill-fitting raw socket to a blunt, bleeding stump, an unraveled titanium stump oozing synthetic blood, a high encryption patent. An unintelligible spasm of plasmatic pain shudders through the socket. From a tilt in the dusty sweep of first light, a blind spot of lossless compression, the stump pushes firmly into the tight, aching socket, its titanium framework of bioalgorithmic flesh, Kepriderm seeks to reconnect with painful organic material. It rips into the delicate clotting of necrosed flesh, forming granulation tissue. It burrows into the fucked up socket to retrieve missing genomic data for the functioning cybernetic hive mind. I want to steal fire. I want to use my private language on you. I want to reach catharsis all over your beautiful face. You organized this violence. I want to fuck you like an animal. I want to macerate you, absorb and metabolize you. I want to make you cry. Our conceptual dependency. This is our fatal magic. You are my shroud of byssus. You are my shroud of bleached sea silk, so rare and so fine that it can be folded into a matchbox and kept on my person at all times. God's eye may be on the sparrow, but my eye will always be on you. Okay, I'm going to go quickly now because I am really running out of time. I'm very sorry. Okay, so this was Mirror, which was, I played around with backwards and forwards, both in the choreography and the text, and Teenage. So I was a fat girl as a teenager, and I wanted to find value and meaning in myself. And I knew that fat girls were not deemed worthy of protection in the patriarchal world I was growing up in. In the misogynistic ecology, fatness was an absolute exclusion from both being desired and the right to desire, which meant that in a young society emerging into the wilderness of puberty, there was no place for me to be treated carefully or protected. I quickly understood that my only resource in that brutal economy was this total access to my body and promiscuity. I understood that I couldn't afford to make boys wait or earn their respect and care. I did not have the libidinous value for that. Boys were sexually curious. I might have been too, given the chance in different circumstances. I offered them my early developed body to exercise their curiosity on. During these encounters, I was absent-minded. I had no conception of consent, and I was incredibly susceptible to coercion. This access made me feel like I was participating in life and mastering the great powerful forces, and this could put me in the right place at the right time to be loved by these cruel boys. After these brief encounters happened, these boys would tell everyone about my abject immoral permissions and my tarnished purity. I wanted to simultaneously have a superpower to endure their violence and remain intact, as well as the superpower to cast a spell so powerful that it would disarm them of their brutality, or failing that, annihilate them completely. I didn't know how punk being a fat girl was and still is, and how much the spite of I'll show you would define my life. Okay, some installation shots. And this is the Turner Prize installation. And this is the book that came out with all the text of the project. It was published by Strange Attractor and distributed by MIT Press. Okay, I'm going to say something quickly about it. DC Productions, Our Fatal Magic, deployed the central ideas of Cixous Écriture Féminine, inscribing the excesses of femininity in the hegemonic patriarchal order, writing that wants to intoxicate, be purple, transgress. A lot of these feminist theorists and philosophers were what we would call essentialists. But I believe it is our life works to transform and reimagine ideas that are useful and then reclaim them and not always throw them away. When I first became interested in feminist scholarship and activism, I wasn't anti-trans at all. But in retrospect, I had and wanted an essentialist position on gender because it was the only way at the time I felt I could address the rage that was bubbling in me about my experiences of gendered violence, sexualization, and discrimination. I wanted there to be some kind of mystical realm that could explain the phobia and violence. My absolute lack of imagination left me only able to relegate this yearning to weaponize my otherness in the confines of an ambitious biology. I read about queer feminism, Black feminism, trans activism, colonialism, white supremacy, intersectionality. I spoke to people, I listened, I had discussions, and I completely repositioned myself. And in that transformation, better and multiple potentials unfolded for what an emancipatory feminist politic could be, that extended far, far beyond the horizons of an essentialist feminist biological position, which ultimately seeks to rule equally in a house that is rotten to its very core. In my writing, I tried to transform some of these ideas that I was initially drawn to, and thinking about gender and sexuality in a different way. In Our Fatal Magic, all the characters are unfixed in terms of their gender and biology, but they all inhabit femininity as a mode of subjectivity and social interface. So it's not a city of women, but a feminine city. A feminism that isn't interested in anti-racism and anti-capitalism, isn't invested in trans rights, sex workers' rights, and an intersectional and emancipatory equitable center of gravity is meaningless to me, and I don't want to be part of it. TERFs are not feminists, capitalists are not feminists. Feminism isn't about being a boss. We should abolish all bosses. Okay, I'm kind of running out of time, I'm afraid. So I don't know what to do. Should I just show images very quickly and then come to what I'm working on now? Or should I, yeah, maybe I'll do that. Okay. So after I finished the project I was working on, DC, I felt a kind of vacuum, and I thought about what I wanted to work on next. And the question around my family was very, very, very much playing on my neurosis. I don't have children or siblings, and I have just a mum and an aunt, and they're becoming quite elderly. So I wrote a play called Tragedia about their relationships and this tragic accident where the child is killed. And it's really a contemplation on kinship, on love, on how we recognize who we are in each other's love, really, and the inevitability of grief, and how hard it is to be grateful that one had the luck and chance to love and be loved so much and not to want it to last forever. Okay. So here are some installation shots of that. I wish I could hear all of you. It's so weird. I'll just read you maybe 1 or 2 lines from the piece. Okay. There is no mother. There is nowhere for me to deposit all this unproductive love I have amassed for you. It will calcify me in your image like a teratoma unformed metabolized twin. Hair, teeth, and nails, some orifices, enough anthropomorphic organic matter to cast a resurrection spell. Aunt, make a circle of salt, call upon the angels, Abaddon, Leliel, Azrael, and Metatron. Rise and make all livable again. My baby's wet, bare cub-like mouth, more softly parted than her stomach, and dripping too with reddish and scarlet gooey galaxy. And where it drips all red, all scarlet, and all gooey, it flows back into starry bronzed galaxy, wet stardust. I ache with bubbling rising sorrow, unable to find the edges and collect it back into me. I kiss your little chocolatey mouth, brought back from the slaughterhouse. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick whiz through what I'm working on now. I'm sorry, I have really run out of time. Yeah, so this is the project I'm working on at the moment. It's called the Neon Hieroglyph, which is a term about hallucinogenics. So this is it. So these are some of the things I'm looking at: entoptic images, visual images that originate within the visual processing system. The term entoptic comes from the Greek from within vision, indicating that images come from anywhere within the optic system. So it looks at why these are the kind of blueprint for hallucinations, really. They're the things that kind of create patterns. But they're also, this slide here like shows early kind of engravings and paintings found Paleolithic and before actually on caves. And I really love this idea that the first representations that were made were from, you know, from your eye, that they were just like a kind of desire to reproduce the most basic thing you see, which is before you see the world, you see what your eye sees inside. But then I am interested in why hallucinations induced by hallucinogens, but also during trances and channeling, why do they all have the same kind of language? So this is Georgiana Horton's psychic portraits, Ethel Le Ressignol's paintings, and here you can see like how these were made in the 1940s, but they look completely acidy, very acidy. And if you look at the kind of skin textures, they have this, you know, like kind of weird pattern, tapestry type thing going on. But also this, which is an AI generated Google Deep Dream image, which is interesting because like when AI are allowed to dream, they dream in uninhibited psychedelics. So it is a fungus. It's a piece about ergot. It's a big project that has many different iterations, because that's how I work, about ergot, which is a fungus from which LSD can be derived and grows on common grains and milled into flour. And before industrial milling, it was very common for these outbreaks to happen. That's what it looks like. The questions I'm looking at: temporality, cosmic and psychedelic time versus subjective human time, and capitalist conceptions of time and labor. What function can experiences of cosmic time that can seem nihilistic in their scope play in a moment of time-sensitive direct action, such as the one we are now in the face of social collapse? Atomization and collectivity, psychedelic senses of unity versus alienation, simultaneously, beautifully, absolutely networked to and with everything, extending beyond traditional conceptions of subjectivity and being, and also absolutely insignificant. A transcendental, loving, communal nihilism, a forever now within which we all coexist. A dissolution of self or ego is a condition of the psychedelic experience. This is implicitly in opposition to capitalist and fascist notions of self and identity. Acid is green, anti-supremacist, horizontal, no borders, communism. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move on. This is there was a lot of, it's a really feminized history as well. Like, it was used as an abortive substance. A lot of the people that were in these dancing plagues were women. It's also, I mean, you know, I'm not a historian, unlike some of you, but I am interested also in a slight fake news maybe version of history where, you know, I think that this idea that the drink that was used during the Eleusinian mysteries, kykeon, there's theories that it was made with ergot, but then you can kind of disprove them quite quickly. But I'm quite interested, so I choose to believe them, if that makes sense. So this kind of psychedelic drink was consumed, and they embodied through it the descent and ascent of Persephone into the underworld. And also there's this incredible historical case of long-term exposure to ergot baked into daily bread on a very remote island in Italy that was between 1600 to 1949. And like, the kind of mythology that emerges there is so incredible. And like, it's one of the only kind of Western mythologies where witches come out as like socialist, positive, stealing from the rich kind of thing. There's also like witchcraft and ergot connection. I'm not going to show you this. This is a little clip from the last big outbreak that was at Pont Saint-Esprit in 1952, and which was also one of the only documented large outbreaks. So, a house for ghosts. I would like to create a mausoleum for psychedelic witches, a house for ghosts where the Gothic and the hallucinatory collide, where Gothic affects and fractal dread are interpreted into sculptures drawn from a taxonomy of burial object structures and ceremony. This is Paul Feck's Tome for a Dead Hippie. And then, what can I say? Okay, this is it. I'm brimming with unassigned faith. Should I read you? God, there's no way for me to communicate with you really, but should I read you one last, okay, I see, yes. I'll read you one last thing, which is from the new project, which is, I'll read you the descent, Persephone's descent to the underworld that transforms into an ascent from the underworld into the light. It is time to say goodbye. Your funeral will be your fairy name, spelt in a murmuration pattern at dusk, they promised us. Down Rarian Field, ellipsis, carnivores, swanskin and poplin. Consumed spoiled grains fatally atrophies in muted purple the useful limbs. Can also tessellate fractals that bridge into worlds unknown, where our grasp on a telepathic interdependent language is sensual and somatic. Sound waves can only ever travel as long as their molecular collaborators will carry them. Then they will end up in a museum of unrecoverable vibrations. Down skin, pelt, vellum, alert tangled roots, subcutaneous flesh, subterranean blind life. My bodily remains, your bodily remains, and all the bodily remains that ever were and ever will be. Down coal and gold in the rocks, a coughed ash cloud. Gold production in the universe is present in the dust from which the solar system is formed. Gold, yellow, but will not go clear like butter does in the heat, into the gold extracted with cyanide. Bitter almonds, cassava, Zyklon B, cherry stone, apple seed. In the smoke of combusting plastics, in the production of paper and textiles, in the stabilizing of the photographic image on paper. Gold ring of Saturn rubbed against the sty on a puffy red eyelid, eyelash fan shut, Venus flytrap, beneath neon hieroglyph and solar pulse, yellow golden glow. Gold heirloom, white gold cocktail watch for scrap metal, melted white gold, will not go clear like snow in first light, forever night, white gold. Our mouths open, our tongue deep in your mouth against the gold filling of an unnerved dead tooth. In this erotic kiss, we are resurrected. My tongue pressed against your unresurrectable biology, baby Osiris. Down into the source of the well we all drink from, it binds to iron in our blood. Liquid biopowerful poisons traveling up through the compacted earth, corroding and seeping into the system of pipes and flushes, through the mouths and nipples of marble gods and heroes flowing directly into their mouths they drink. Baby Osiris in the underworld asks about those technocratic desires. Ours are Stone Age desires, so hot, molten lava, from the molten core of the world, spitting out magma into the cosmic spray of the galaxy. We are sucked into the core, bloodless, past the gates, into the flaming heat of hematic hellmouth, the deathless, eternal endurance of the burning of the abyssal fire. Survived and up, transformed towards the light, through the other side, through gold again and platinum, the mesospheric mantle, through the waning primordial heat and decaying radioactivity of uranium, up into the softening, liquidizing rocks of the asthenosphere, past the diamond mines, traveling up through the compacted earth, counter-agents in the system of alkaline pipes. Our lips and tongues will push through the mouths and nipples of marble gods and heroes to suck the poison out of rubious flesh mouths, like from fatal snake bites. Okay.
One last time, my baby.
I'm going to play this so that I can recompose myself before questions, if that's okay.
One last time, my baby, my love, haunt me. come from the shadows of this gloom, knotted, rootless heartbreak, and step into a supernatural light that exposes your familiar, beloved, casually smiling face.
Opening the door, you turn around, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching Top of the Pops, your face generous, contagious delight.
I'd like to say a huge thank you. That was amazing. So powerful, compelling, engaging, and really moving to listen to. I don't think I've ever heard such a beautifully articulate and vulnerable, thoughtful, and profoundly considered analysis of art making and why it matters. And it's been really lovely to see all of the enthusiasm and excitement on Twitter, in the comments. There's just so much love and appreciation for you and your work, and all credit to you. You really deserve it. We have about 15 minutes or 10 or so minutes for questions. I'll ask one, and then I've started to collate the ones that people have really wonderful, brilliant questions people have been posting in the comments. So I'll start with mine, and then we'll go to other people's.
Sure.
I really enjoyed that. That was so wonderful, and brilliant, creatively, intellectually, wonderful. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about relationships historically and in the present between socialism and the occult. I know around the time of, I emailed you about this, but around the time of the 2019 general election, on your Instagram, you'd had a link to a spell that was meant to, hopefully produce an electoral outcome different to what happened. So I guess what I'm interested in is particularly us having lived under the last 10 years of Conservative government, and we've got another 4 years or so. What the occult means in that context, particularly when it comes to questions of time, the future, and potential futures, or the imagination.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is, I think a lot of people that are much more involved with me in kind of political activism are aware that, you are contributing to building a house that you will probably never live in yourself. But nonetheless, that shouldn't change how you approach it and the kind of energy that you put into it. I think the thing that I think about, I mean, you did ask me this before, not really, but just kind of mentioned these things. And I did think about it at the time, what would I say? And I think that there is, at this moment where things are so, the right is re-emerging in such a kind of unstoppable way. And I think many people feel very powerless in the face of this kind of fascism. And when you take away, you strip back the kind of political mechanisms that put certain people in power, or how we conceptualize power and governance, there is it's a real spiritual shift. How do you call it? Break between what life is, and I think that is mystical to me. I'm not a believer in an afterlife, and there is something about what a life is for fascists that is completely unacceptably anti-ethical to what I think a life is, which should be a right to dignity. You know, I don't believe in any of the things that even, you know, like centrists, you know, I don't think we should work. I think we should have a completely different way of organizing. But I do think that there is really a fight for on a very existential level with fascism, which is like, what is a life? You know, how can certain structures decide that you're from like cradle to grave, you will live a life, you know, that if you think about it in these kind of terms and take away like the I guess a lot of the kind of vernacular of politics, and you think about it on an existential level, it is a fight for survival in the most basic and most also sophisticated ways. You know, it's a right to think that this thing, there is a miraculousness to being alive that everyone should have access to, and access to dignity, access to having the lives they want, equality. You know, these are things that are spiritual as well. They're not just social. So the socialist witches, I mean, you know, it's interesting because that, I, as you probably noticed, that spell didn't work. But at the same time, you know, I think that it was an incredible moment, and it was traumatic, that loss. I think we lost a lot in that election, really. But yeah, so I'm not sure at the moment I can conjure up a really interesting kind of thesis on that connection. But I do think that if you extend that discourse beyond, yeah, these types of grammars of how we think of them, and think about what it means in a way, if you think about solidarity that goes across time and places, you know, that is quite a spiritual way of thinking about life, of putting your life to the service of making a world that you will not enjoy, but, you know, that others should. Like, one day people should be born into a better place, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think that was such a brilliant and thoughtful answer. I really appreciate that. I think there's also there is something very appealing about imagining potential futures to keep alive possibilities, particularly at a time when they can feel really, you know, in the face of crushing defeats, in the face of the imaginative and the speculative, and the possibility for rethinking our world is essential now as ever. Thank you. Okay, so we've got about 6 minutes for questions. Ella Lewis Williams asked a question earlier about excess. She was talking about the ways in which medieval male clerics often wrote about female mystics having, I think, oozing bodies. Sometimes those would be male bodies. So she's really interested in the politics of excess in your work and how it resonates with you.
I mean, yeah, sorry, I'm trying to come up with good answers. I mean, I think that it's ineffability is a form of excess. That is, you know, and those, I think the kind of why I have been interested in extreme images or extreme acts, the writing of extreme acts, is that there is, on the kind of outer limits of our possibility to talk of heartbreak, or, you know, whether romantic or political, there is only so much that these words can kind of you know, transfer. And there is this excess that exists both in these very extreme experiences, but also in, I think it's changing. And I think that, you know, but as a young person, I definitely felt that I wasn't of the world, and I didn't know why. And, you know, it took me a very long time to unravel. And I didn't go to school as well. I only went to school for like 7 years. I didn't do a BA or an MA. So I think it took me a long time to kind of find, the language around ideas such as excess, but it's also something that is like a condition. It was a condition to existing as a sexualized, subject within a hegemonic patriarchal order as well. So I think, there are different forms. There is this kind of mystical Irigarean kind of idea of excess, which is like that cannot be named, I guess, in a way, and that it is a form of divine. And I do like the idea that things that are not able to kind of be folded down into language do occupy some kind of divinity. But I think that the parameters of what that is change all the time. I don't think it's a static thing. And things that can feel, I think this is a really great moment to think about it, because our lives have become so constricted in a way, and our reality has become so kind of kind of contained, that many things feel very excessive to me, like encounters with nature or, even other bodies can feel much more excessive than they normally would. So I think that, it's not a thing that is stuck in one place all the time. It's like context contingent, really.
Yeah, I think that's such a thoughtful response and a really powerful one. There's a question from Dawn Eva, which I think is a really fascinating question, and actually resonates with another question she's just posted now. But obviously your talk considers psychoanalysis in a very beautiful way. I really loved your engagement with it. And Dawn's question is, what are the relationships like between psychology, psychotherapy, or psychoanalysis and the occult, particularly in relationship to trauma? And she mentions in her more recent comment here about psychedelics as well. It's something that I've written about a lot in my PhD, but I'd love to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see myself as I want to say this, and I think that, like artists are made to be many things that other people don't have to be. And I hope that most of the kind of exercising of these ideas exists in the work itself. And I don't feel that I'm always able to kind of extend beyond that, if that makes sense. So I don't really know how to kind of extend further than, like some of the things that I read out maybe, or, and I agree with her comment that I see here about this idea of duality, but I think that's always, that idea of duality is also something that we are experiencing like politically at the moment, like very strongly as well, this kind of, these forces that feel that they're at play. For many people, they've always been there. I think it's like also a moment where maybe they've penetrated into spheres that were more secluded from them before. So yeah, I'm not sure really what to add to what I said about that. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think that's fantastic. It's the other thing that...
I mean, I don't know about, psychology, like, I guess the question is, which I often wonder about myself, is like, do I go to analysis to be a better person or to find less suffering? And I think that, if you think about it in that way, it kind of, all those, I think the less suffering is what I do. And I think that also takes away some of the kind of, there's no moralism in that, because you have to do psychologically the work that you have to do to suffer less. And it isn't about a kind of, there isn't a moral scale to that, or a kind of absolute. I mean, I think that for me, I'm trying to reach with my work and my internal life an authentic experience of spirituality. And I don't know if that's occult or esoteric, but I want to understand things. And have always been, and I'm enigmatized by a lot. And I do worry about running out of time as well to get there. But I think to me that, there are, I mean, it's interesting. Growing up in India, I was surrounded by occults, I have to say, as a caveat as well, why maybe I'm not able to be as about it. You know, my dad used to do Kabbalistic trees of life. When I was born, the first thing that they did was produce a very detailed kind of chart, astrological chart. I mean, we were surrounded by sannyasi people that were following Bhagwan. You know, I grew up in a lot of things that then I became very embarrassed by when we moved to the West. And now that they have a kind of currency again. But like, for me, there was a long time that I, you know, like my parents took a lot of acid. They love to say they made me on acid. And so it was always in my life. And a lot of children in Goa also were given acid. I wasn't, but like a lot of children were given acid as children. And I think, you know, a lot of people there believed that it had the kind of potentials, that there were radical potentials within those experiences. And I'm interested in that as well. But I think that, like, in a way, I'm trying to maybe articulate a language that is more, as you know, that's the privilege of an artist as well, is to find a language, isn't it? It's to find a way to talk about these things that doesn't have to be tied in or wedded to, you know, other disciplines, if that makes sense. So I want to find a way to talk about what I consider as being spiritual without recoursing to terminologies that have specific connotations. I think I saw, you know, someone talking about like fascism and occultism. I know the Nazis were very interested in the occult, but you know, that's not the kind of occult that I'm interested in. And do you see what I mean? So I'm trying to kind of figure out a way to create a language through the work that can talk about these things.
I think we've got to wrap it up there. But thank you so much. That was brilliant. I enjoyed it hugely, and I know our audience did as well. This will be posted online, YouTube afterwards, so keep following The Call Told for details of that. This is the moment when you would normally get a round of applause. So please, everyone, share your thanks in the comments. And thank you. I'm so grateful for your time and for such wonderful, brilliant reflections on your work.
I really didn't expect so many people to come. I was thinking it was going to be a really intimate chat. It's great. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk about these things with everyone. Thank you.